We're ready for Chapter 8, The Strength of Love. Plantation owners sometimes had children with their own slaves. The babies were born slaves too. Their father was their master. It was a way for white men to add to the number of slaves they owned without paying any money. Ellen Craft, born in Clinton, Georgia, was one such slave. She had very light skin because her father was a white plantation owner named Major James Smith. Her mother was a house slave. Major Smith's wife did not like Ellen, and in 1837 she gave the girl away to her daughter Eliza, who lived in Macon, Georgia. Ellen cried bitterly when she was separated from her mother. She was only 11. Within a year, Major and Mrs. Smith moved to Macon. That made life better for Ellen. Now she was able to see her mother sometimes. Like her mother, Ellen was a house slave. She learned to sew and speak well. She was such a good worker that her mistress allowed her to live alone in a little cabin behind the big house. In time, Ellen met a slave named William Craft. He belonged to another master. When he was younger, William's parents, and then his sisters, were sold off to different owners. William had not even been allowed to say goodbye. Because William was a gifted carpenter, his master put him to work in a furniture shop. He also worked in a hotel waiting on tables. His master took most of his earnings, but William got to keep a small amount. This little bit of money was to become very important in time. William and Ellen fell in love. Ellen was afraid to marry because she had seen too many slave couples pulled apart and separated for life. But eventually, she said yes. She loved William and she wanted children, but not children who would be slaves. Ellen decided there was only one answer: escape. How would they ever do it, though? They lived in Macon, Georgia. That was the deep South. The closest free states, Ohio and Pennsylvania, were almost 800 miles away. Then William got an idea. With her light skin, Ellen could pass for a white person, and she spoke like her masters. Ellen would pretend to be a gentleman from the South. William would pretend to be her slave. They could travel by train and steamboat to southern Pennsylvania. William set the plan in motion. He used some of his saved money to buy a top hat. He also bought a gentleman's coat and boots. Ellen sewed herself a pair of men's pants. Then William cut off her hair. But she still looked like a woman. So he bought her dark glasses and tried wrapping a handkerchief around her face. Back then, people often did that when they had a toothache. Yes, this disguise might work. No one could see Ellen's pretty face. With the top hat and new clothes, she looked like a man. Christmas was coming. Ellen's mistress gave Ellen permission to visit relatives. William's owner did the same. So now they had a whole week away from their owners. It would be 7 days before anyone came looking for them. By that time, they hoped to be in Pennsylvania. There was just one problem. Ellen could not write. What if someone asked the gentleman to sign his name on a ticket? They thought about this for days. Then Ellen got the idea to bind her arm in a sling. A broken arm was the perfect excuse for not being able to write. 4 days before the Christmas of 1848, William and Ellen set out at dawn. At every turn in the long trip, they ran into trouble. First, it was at the train station. They did not know that William's boss at the furniture store was suspicious and had come looking for him. He ran along the platform, peering in every window of the train. Ellen, in disguise, was in the car for whites, but William was in the car for blacks. Just as the store owner reached it, the conductor rang the bell. Away went the train. The Crafts were safe. but only for the moment. In the car for the Whites, a man sat down next to Ellen. Oh no! He was a friend of her owner's. Ellen had met him many times. She was terrified that he would recognize her. When he spoke to her, she pretended she couldn't hear. Imagine her relief when he got off the train a few stops later. By early evening, the train arrived in Savannah, Georgia. The Crafts got off and took a carriage to the waterfront, where they got on board a steamboat bound for Charleston, South Carolina. Ellen called herself Mr. Johnson. William was her slave. Because she was pretending to be white, Ellen was given a cabin, while William had to stay on the deck all night. He grabbed a couple of hours' sleep on some bags of cotton near the boat's funnel. By morning, he was exhausted and weak from hunger. Mr. Johnson let his slave come to the table for breakfast and gave him scraps from his plate. Some of the other passengers did not approve of this. They told Mr. Johnson he was spoiling his slave. That made Ellen so angry, but she could not show it. Another scare came when they arrived in Charleston, South Carolina. While Ellen tried to buy 2 tickets for the steamboat and the train to Philadelphia, a ticket seller asked William if he belonged to Mr. Johnson. William said yes, but the ticket seller insisted that Mr. Johnson sign his name on a ledger book to prove it. Mr. Johnson pointed to his arm, but the ticket seller just told him to use the other hand. The Crafts were terrified. What was Ellen going to do now? Fortunately, one of the passengers they'd met while on the steamboat to Charleston showed up. He said he knew Mr. Johnson and was willing to vouch for him. Once more, the Crafts were on their way. They went by steamboat up the coast to Wilmington, North Carolina. In Wilmington, they got off the boat and changed to another train. Their troubles were not over. On the train, a woman mistook William for her escaped slave. After discovering her mistake, she apologized, but kept on gabbing about how she'd sold off the runaway slave's wife. That's why he'd run away, to find his wife. When Mr. Johnson muttered that the woman had been unkind, the woman grew very angry. Other passengers turned to listen to the argument. Once more, Ellen was terrified. She had to keep her temper. She had to. She did not say one more word, but let the woman rant about ungrateful slaves who ran away. Ellen and William got off the train near Fredericksburg, Virginia. Next, they went by steamboat up the Potomac River to Washington, D.C. It was Christmas Eve. From Washington, the Crafts caught a train to Baltimore, Maryland. After that, there was only one more train, the one that would take them to Pennsylvania. While still in Baltimore, they had to deal with a station master who wanted to see papers proving that Mr. Johnson owned William. Of course, Ellen didn't have any such papers, but she stayed calm, and she stated firmly that she had bought the tickets and intended to remain on the train. Her firm manner worked. The station master let them on. Ellen and William each went their separate cars. They were both exhausted and fell asleep immediately. On Christmas Day, they woke up in Pennsylvania, free at last. Of course, by now their masters realized they'd run away. Slave hunters would be on the lookout for them. They had to be very careful. Abolitionists in Pennsylvania sent them much farther north to Boston. Ellen found work sewing. William opened a shop where he made cabinets and sold used furniture. They made friends with a former slave named William Wells Brown. He took them on a lecture tour, and they told their story. They became well known among abolitionists. Even in Boston, they were not safe. One day, a white man named John Knight showed up. He was from the furniture shop where William had worked in Macon, Georgia. Knight was traveling with another man named Hughes. These 2 men had been sent by William's former owner to catch them. Knight and Hughes hung around the Crafts' apartment and shop, waiting for them. But hundreds of Bostonians, both black and white, rallied around the Crafts. They knew them from the lecture tour. These new friends guarded the Crafts' home and threatened the slave catchers. Knight and Hughes went back to Macon empty-handed. Ellen and William were grateful for their support. But like Henry Box Brown, they decided to move to England. There they would be beyond the reach of slave catchers. Before they left the United States, they did something they'd wanted to do for a long time. On November 7th, 1850, they went to a minister who married them. Slave hunters patrolled the docks in Boston. So instead of trying to sail straight to England, they went by stagecoach to Halifax on the coast of Canada. They planned to board a ship there. However, nothing went easily for the Crafts. Near Halifax, the stagecoach overturned in a violent storm. Ellen and William had to walk the last 7 miles to the city in the pouring rain. They managed to book a passage on a ship, but Ellen came down with pneumonia. Back then, there were no antibiotics to stop a disease like pneumonia. Several times on the trip across the Atlantic Ocean, it looked like she would die. But she hung on and got well again. A few days before Christmas of 1850, they saw the coast of England before them. It had been almost 2 years since they had left Georgia for freedom. Life in England was good. The Crafts went to school, ran a boarding house, and wrote a book about their long and difficult journey. They bought a house outside of London and raised a family. Their daughter, 4 sons, and 3 adopted sons from Africa fulfilled Ellen's dream. The Crafts had children, and they were all free. After the Civil War, the Crafts went back to Georgia. They settled in Savannah, where they opened a school for poor people. They helped care for sick neighbors and even paid for the wedding of young black couples. After all, it was the Crafts' strong and enduring love that had helped them deal with so many dangers on the road to freedom.